Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Free Assange Vigil series. My name is Taylor Hudak, and I am joined this evening by my co-hosts Andrew Smith and Steve Poikinen, and also a very special happy birthday to you, Steve. Today is his birthday. Now, for some stats for you guys, there are 48 days until the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing, and today is day 3,403 since the start of his illegal and arbitrary detention. And it is 355 days since the trafficking of Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison following a $4.2 billion IMF loan to Ecuador. And then as for Chelsea Manning, today is 20 days since she was released from federal custody. So for this evening, we do have a lot to touch on, and we have some very special guests who will be joining us throughout the evening. But our first guest of tonight, we are so pleased to be joined by Jared and Elizabeth Beck. Before we get started into some of our news, guys, Jared and Elizabeth, I want you guys to be able to give us an update on the DNC lawsuit.
Sure. Well, thank you, and it's great to be here with you all tonight. So basically, last week, as the coronavirus stuff was really picking up steam, we had our heads down and we were putting the finishing touches on our petition for writ of certiorari to be filed with the Supreme Court, and we filed that last week. So our hope is that the Supreme Court will look at our brief and agree to take the appeal of the case and hear all the issues in our lawsuit against the DNC, because as we said in our brief, we really feel that the court has to address these grave issues dealing with the integrity of our democratic institutions at a time when I think lack of confidence in this country's democracy is at an all-time low, and things are really close to the boiling point if they haven't already gone over the boiling point. So we really hope that the Supreme Court is going to step in and do the right thing and hear the case.
Could you summarize a little bit the arguments that you guys had made and that the DNC had made against you in court, just to kind of fill in a little bit of backstory for people in case they aren't too familiar with the lawsuit?
Oh, sure thing. So we filed this case back in 2016, actually before the 2016 Democratic Convention, when Kishore 2.0 started releasing documents online showing that the Democratic Party was favoring Hillary Clinton from the beginning of the primary. And this was even before WikiLeaks started dropping its emails. So really, really early in those disclosures, we were getting hard evidence that the DNC was running a rigged process. And so what we did was we filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of donors to the Bernie Sanders campaign and Bernie Sanders supporters, arguing that the DNC was committing fraud, negligent misrepresentation, and really breaching its charter obligation to members of the Democratic Party, which right in its own charter, the DNC is required to run a fair and even-handed primary process. We had a long hearing in the district court before Judge Williams Locke in the Fort Lauderdale division of the Southern District of Florida. And it was at that hearing that the DNC's counsel got up in open court and stated that they don't believe that the obligation in their own charter has any binding effect on what the DNC can or can't do during a primary process. And as the DNC's own lawyers said, they believe that they are free to go into the back rooms and smoke cigars and pick the candidates any way they feel they can pick them and ignore the will of the voters. Unfortunately, we lost the case at the district court level because the judge ruled that he didn't believe that we had standing legal standing to pursue these claims against the DNC. We appealed the ruling to the 11th Circuit, which is the first level of appellate review in the federal system. And the 11th Circuit also agreed we didn't have standing, although they did reverse the lower court on certain issues. So we think that we most certainly do have standing in this case. In fact, there's a long line of cases that we are putting before the Supreme Court, which show that the Democratic Party back in the Jim Crow era was using much the same arguments that they're using now to actually exclude black voters from casting their ballots in the Democratic primaries. So the Supreme Court stopped that practice in the 1950s, and we're hoping that the Supreme Court sees fit to intervene again and intervene in this case and uphold the plain language of the DNC's charter obligations.
Let me jump in here real quick. Is it at all possible to just run with what the DNC has been saying? We're a private organization. We are under no obligation to follow our own rules or bylaws. Can you turn that back around on them and be like, well, then what the fuck are you doing in a public election? Isn't that a massive conflict of interest?
That's a great question. In fact, the Supreme Court was presented with much the same question back when it was dealing with these so-called white primaries. I mean, this is back in the Jim Crow era. The Democratic Party was really the only game in town in the southern states, the Dixiecrats. And even after, blacks won the right to vote in the Civil War through the Civil War amendments, the Democrats still didn't want to let blacks participate in the election process, and so they banned blacks from actually joining the Democratic Party. This is in the 1920s, and the issue got all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled just as you said. Now, look, the Democratic Party has been really publicly entrusted with the right to vote. So much, public money and resources go into their primaries, and there would be, if you allow a private organization to circumvent constitutional rights by saying, well, we're a private organization, therefore we're protected by freedom of association, we can do however we please, then the constitutional rights, such as the right to vote, would be meaningless. And it's really interesting that the Democratic Party is so strident with these legal positions that it takes, because they're totally contrary to what the Supreme Court ruled in these cases that came up in all the way from the 1920s through the 1950s, but they're kind of lost to modern jurisprudence. We're really hoping that the Supreme Court goes back and sees that everything that the DNC is saying about its rights and abilities now contradicts what the Supreme Court already ruled when it said that you can't ban blacks from joining the Democratic Party and taking part in those primaries. So absolutely, yeah. I 100% that's really the key issue, and that's how it has to be turned around on them.
We recently went, or about a month ago now, went to Washington, D.C., 3 of us did, and Taylor went to London to cover the first week of Julian's extradition hearing. And on Tuesday night there, we held a candlelight vigil at the location where Seth Rich was murdered. We found out just this week that as a matter of fact, the FBI did examine Seth Rich's computer. And this is something that they had been saying did not happen unequivocally, or they had met every single requirement put in front of them. And with these lawsuits being put forth by Ty Clevenger on behalf of Ed Butowski, do you hold out any hope that we might get some genuine truth through this process?
I do have hope that we're going to find out the truth. And I say that because here we are, just think of the JFK assassination, right? I mean, when JFK had his head blown off in November of 1963, immediately what happened or transpired was a full-scale effort to cover up and confuse what happened and seal everything and place, as many obstacles as possible in front of the American public finding out the truth. But here we are in 2020, and I think we actually have a very clear picture of what happened to JFK. I mean, he was assassinated by an intricately coordinated deep state cabal, or whatever you want to call it. And we have a lot of documents and witness testimonies that show that. It's just a matter of time before the truth comes out. I think it's really the time frame that is in question. I mean, are we going to know the truth of what happened to Seth Rich this year or next year? Probably not. But it's actions like Ty Clevenger and his FOIA actions and his representation of Bukowski and Matt Couch that's going to ultimately pull out bit by bit the hidden information that we need to see to put the picture together. But I think we will know the truth. I think we'll know in our lifetimes. I don't think we're going to know in the next couple of years, though, because along with everything else that's going on, I mean, we're in the middle of for lack of a better word, we're in the middle of a shitstorm here.
We're in the middle of a war. This man made me promise, we're married, right? This man made me promise that I would not interrupt him, and I can't take it anymore. Just be like an accessory?
No, you can speak freely. I just wanted to get through the DNC introduction.
Oh, good.
To make sure that
you weren't really.
Just to make sure
we're in a war.
No, I just wanted to get through the DNC, the facts of that, just to make sure it was clear. And if anybody has any questions about the status.
And don't kick me under the table either.
Okay.
Continue, Elizabeth.
Well, I just think we're in a war. They're telling us curfew, stay indoors. It's like when London was getting bombed.
No, you're absolutely right.
I read this article by a Russian general. You know who I'm talking about.
Gerasimov.
Thank you, Gerasimov. And he wrote about a new type of war. And I found it so interesting. And it was very, 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 very difficult to find a translation of his article. It was published in a very obscure military journal. But he talked about asymmetrical warfare and how in the last 50 years, the side with less traditional military might has always won asymmetrical wars. And so wars are being conducted in a new way. And so I think we are in a state of war. But they're undeclared. That's the other crazy thing. Current wars are not declared. But I think we're in a state of war.
Well, they just declared war.
What?
They just declared war on the goddamn coronavirus.
Right.
And when you put it inside that kind of a framing, it allows a little bit more leeway to declare medical martial law. It allows a little bit more leeway for them to grant the Department of Justice the emergency powers that they're seeking to indefinitely detain private citizens because maybe they violated a curfew or maybe they're a carrier.
The right to assemble is enshrined in our Constitution. Gone. The right to freedom of religion. I think some pastor got arrested for holding some religious services. Gone.
Yeah,
and I think that if I'm not mistaken, the pastor was in Florida, but it could have been Texas. I'm not 100%.
Right. No, I think Tampa.
Oh, it was Tampa,
and
yeah.
There was a second one that was recently arrested, I think, in Louisiana. So yeah, definitely a full-on assault against freedom of association, freedom of religion. Everything we hold dear in this country.
Free speech was long gone.
You're right, but I mean, it's it's a wartime posture. I mean, I've been watching reports from Jason Goodman, who's been walking around New York City and filming in the middle of this apocalypse.
We like Jason.
Yeah, but the thing is that
George Webb is a little bit of a cipher.
Well, see,
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Don't kick me.
Okay, but he's there's you can see the military presence though in these subway stations. I mean, it's definitely a state. You may not be called martial law, but that's what we're in right now. And the question's why? Is it really because of a virus? Is it really because of basically a very vigorous and aggressive flu strain that's doing this, or is there something that's as you said, maybe this, or maybe this war on the coronavirus is really a stand-in for a war against something else that can't be spoken, because there's a lot that has to remain unspoken while this war is being fought. I don't know, but strange time.
The Kardashians? Is it a war against the Kardashians? Is that what it is? Is that what can't be spoken?
If somebody could make this happen, I would be really, 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 really happy. When we get off quarantine, nobody tell the fucking Kardashians. Nobody. Let them keep thinking they need to hide out. I would take another couple of weeks of quarantine if nobody lets them know when it gets lifted.
I mean, I personally think it's a war against the working and poor and what's left of the middle class of the United States and our basic liberties and the liberties of people around the world. Because you see people get literally locked in their houses at this point. There's a man in Kentucky that they wouldn't tell him his test results. They wouldn't tell him or show him his test results. They said, "Yeah, you're positive." He said, "Let me see my tests." And they said, "Well, we can't show that to you." And then they sent him home to self-quarantine and put a sheriff outside of his house because he refused to keep himself isolated. So they put the force of the state out there to enforce that isolation. And this coronavirus is coming on the back of the largest bailout that's ever happened in United States history. We're giving trillions of dollars to the banks while the nation goes bankrupt. You have stores like Lowe's and Home Depot that are also garden centers that are staying open, while local garden centers and local pantries aren't allowed to open their doors because they're not an essential service, but somehow every big box retailer is. So it's literally to try to transfer wealth, power, and community from the small vestiges that are left and move that into the hands of the richest among the United States and among the world, while at the same time not allowing people to even get in the streets to protest the fact that they're doing it under threat of martial law.
It also inherently turns people against each other because we see this coronavirus being referred to as the enemy, but essentially other people then become the enemy because you're so afraid of people. They're telling everyone to stay separated, and then people get irritated about this. And then also, too, there's been measures taken in certain counties and certain states where people are being encouraged to tell on their neighbors for leaving their homes or for holding gatherings of more than 10 people or whatever the limit is in your state and in your county. That's a really frightening thing. And then also, too, the psychological impacts beyond that, as far as being stuck in your home for an extended period of time, especially if you tend to maybe not get along with the people that you're around. There's some serious psychological consequences. And we did joke about that before the stream, of course. Elizabeth, you brought up the movie The Shining as a joke, saying, look what happens when people are stuck in close quarters for such a long time. But really, it's true. The long-term psychological impacts, I think, are going to be really, really devastating if this does continue for some time. And I feel like there's no reason to believe, honestly, at this point, that this is going to go away in a month.
And I really think what it'll eventually come down to is if people are willing to stay in their homes while their world gets looted. If people are willing to accept that tanks can beat a virus, because you're seeing them be mobilized across the country. You have these false reports and threats of, oh, we're going to quarantine in 48 hours. Come out, they're out for 12 to 15 hours, and then another source is like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. That was just an internet hoax. Where they use tools and methods like this to gauge public reaction through like the NSA service, at least in my opinion. And it literally lets them map where the front line will be and where the civilian resistance will be. And then they throw tanks in that direction. Because you can literally go anywhere on the internet right now and find the videos of just 10-minute train rides just with nothing but tanks and armored personnel carriers and things that you don't need to fight a virus, but you need to fight a population that's fighting back against tyranny stepping on it. So I'm more concerned about the response to the virus than I am about the virus itself.
I have a theory that as long as people have some 3 basic things like food and shelter, and they're allowed to have sex, they will not fight back. The vast majority of people. It's my theory based on having a bunch of chickens in my backyard. Okay?
Yeah, no, when I first started my show, Slow News Day, my friend Sarah was co-hosting with me, and her mom was, her thing was, nobody's going to get up off their couch until it gets taken from them.
Correct.
But, I mean, look, a $1,200 check isn't going to keep people from losing their couch. And by the way, that $1,200 check, it's an advance on next year's tax credit. They basically like loaned or fronted us our own money and called it a gift.
My concern is that this country has had over half a century of great prosperity. Americans have not known what real hunger is, really. We just have a lot of food. That doesn't mean, we all have our own crosses to bear, but we have not known true hunger, true wretchedness, true just third world, just wretchedness. And I'm just concerned because I don't know what the future holds, but I think the very basic things that people need in order to stay peaceful and calm may not be available in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm talking basic food and necessities. People get upset when they don't get their latest iPhone, but that's not going to cause a revolt. Not a real revolt. Maybe a stampede at the local Apple store, but not a real revolt. Okay.
A stampede at the local Apple store. I'd watch that. I would watch that.
People want excitement. Look, we have boxing for a reason. Sometimes people stampede just for excitement. Okay, but a revolt, you need to be starving with your stomach growling and your children are malnourished while the queen goes up there and says, "Let them eat cake." That causes a revolt, and we're nowhere near that. But I don't know. I think that nobody wants to be in that situation, but I don't know if we're headed in that direction.
I mean, they've basically given us the toolkit and a perfect reason to go on nationwide at-home general strike. We could do that right now. We could all collectively withhold our labor and demand some real goddamn agency for ourselves and some genuine representation. I think that the stimulus bill is designed to keep us from doing that, but you can't hide the fact that it was like a $4.5 or $5 trillion giveaway to corporate America, with us getting a couple of scraps that we're basically loaning ourselves.
If I may add a point here, so one of my theories about the what's really going on with the coronavirus is what we're not talking about, which is what Russia is basically doing to the price of oil. And when you think about it, that's actually, to me, that basically Russia refused to collude with OPEC and Saudi Arabia, and keep the price of oil high. Okay, they're like, fuck that. We're gonna flood the market with oil, and we're gonna let the price go as low as it goes, and that's just going to destroy our entire petroleum industry. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it can't survive at the price oil is currently. That is, to me, that is a direct assault by the Russians on the petrodollar system. Okay, which is the one thing that has been holding up our bloated economy and preventing it from crashing into the ground ever since it was instituted in the 1970s. Okay, hold on.
What?
Once you get rid of the petrodollar, once you eliminate the extraordinary value that this system we forced on the rest of the world is, which is basically requiring that any country that wants to buy oil has to do so in dollars. You absolutely take out the value of the dollar, and you send the U.S. economy and the global economy crashing into the ground, and something else is going to have to emerge from the ashes. We took out Iraq to preserve the petrodollar. We took out Libya to preserve the petrodollar. We're trying to take out Venezuela to preserve the petrodollar, but we can't take out Russia
or China.
And that's really what's going on here. And if it wasn't for the coronavirus, it would be very, very apparent to everybody what's causing the stock market to crash in the ground. Everybody would be pointing at Russia and saying it's because the Russians are crashing the price of oil. But because of coronavirus, we're having an entirely different discussion. And what concerns me is there's no way we're going to win any type of war as a country if we can't even identify who our true enemy is or what's really going on. But our government's gotten us so confused and so infantilized that, we don't know which way is up at this point.
Who is our real enemy? It is us. I don't know. That was a cartoon.
I mean, at this point, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier. There's the concept of the nation state is quaint as fuck now, and the people that we're ultimately battling in this are a global cabal, if you will, of just sociopathic billionaires who have no allegiance to any country whatsoever.
What?
They have marginal allegiance to themselves. You what now?
What do they want?
More.
What?
It's like the
more and more and more.
It's like the used car guy. Like, all you want is the next sale. Like, all you want is the next fix, the next way to make a buck. And that's what this is. Like, the retreat, essentially, the drop in the economy, to me, is just a larger investment, because these companies aren't willing to just lose money like this. So to me, the way that I see it is that there was some actor, state or non-state, nation or non-nation, that started this, and then someone said, hey, this is going to be a great time to invest in pooling all of these resources together and getting globalized control of good distribution. So that's my biggest fear, is that it's not necessarily a nation buying for power, but it's that unelected small few trying to move the world so that way they can control it all and control the production and control the distribution of resources. And it literally comes down to controlling what people do in their daily lives. Because this lockdown is even now to the point that they're like, oh, you can't sell alcohol. Oh, we're thinking about banning cigarettes. Like, what does alcohol and cigarette sales have anything to do with the coronavirus? It's literally just little mini dictators all across the country.
Yeah. I thought alcohol was an antiseptic.
Yeah, no, they're literally debating shutting down liquor stores in the state of Ohio.
Why? People are
That's
cooped up,
insane,
they're
man.
not
But here, not only are the liquor stores still open here, but the weed stores are still open here too. Like the cannabis collectives are apparently still considered an essential business, which I personally believe that it's medicine. So, you know, I'm more power to them. But oh man, we just found out last night, Santa Cruz County went on for real lockdown, and they're talking about police presence, and they're talking about an insane amount, dollar amount in fines, and the what were essential businesses, that list is all changed. I might read some of it off later, but is the interview portion of the vigil tonight, so I'll hold off on that. But it is just it's draconian as shit, and it's nothing compared to Poland. I have a dude who watches the show who lives there, and he sent me the statement that their government issued yesterday morning, and it is just harsh. If you are on quarantine, everyone in your house is on quarantine. If you cannot, children under 18 can't be in the street at all unless accompanied by an adult. Just on and on and on, and they use language like mandatory and forced, and it is I mean, it sounds like it should be in a movie that's, you know, detailing what totalitarian regimes look like, just to set up.
Could we pull up
but this is happening.
the article from the Independent?
Good.
Because we have a couple articles we wanted to talk with you guys about. This one is Dictatorships Often Start in the Face of a Threat. UN Privacy Chief warns against long-lasting theft of freedoms amid coronavirus surveillance.
Yeah, and
if
in
Josh
that
could get that article pulled up on screen for us.
Yeah, in that article, it talks about something that we have frequently spoken about on these vigils. It's a common theme, and that is the surveillance state. And what I found particularly disturbing here is that they're using these tracking devices to ensure that people, of course, are staying away from one another. However, they're able to access other information about people and then can use that against them. Say if you are of a minority population, or if you're in any way it could be a targeted person. They're using this information, of course, for malicious purposes. And these are experts here, and I believe they do quote the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy in this article, who says that this is very much a dangerous path. So, Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on this? Because like Andrew was saying, we really wanted to hear from you guys on this specific issue, and it is on the screen right now.
I think that now, I have never lived in a totalitarian state, but I do think we are headed in that direction. But it is quick but incremental, so I don't think people notice it. But rights will be taken away from you unless you squawk, and I just don't see people squawking. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on people not to create waves, not to be a problem, not to do anything that would jeopardize other people's life. So I think the nature of propaganda and mass control is you use certain things like guilt and all these things to incentivize people to not create problems. But I see, I read that in San Francisco, the state was considering taking over hotels to use as hospitals, which from a practical point of view sounds great, but we actually have the Constitution bars that. I think it's called quartering. The state cannot take private property to quarter soldiers. So this is all ground that has been tread before, and certain rights, actually all of them pretty much. I think the Second Amendment is still alive on a respirator, one of the few that are available. But
that's one of the funny
all
things,
our rights
actually.
are pretty much on
about this whole situation, you see this immediate public shift from conversations about firearm restrictions to people now being like, I can't find enough ammo to buy. So that's one thing that kind of makes me happy, at least a little bit. But my larger concern is you see things like drones being deployed throughout like China, but it's also now California, where they're using drones to literally detect people and have the police speak to them through a speaker so they don't have to fly over there. And it's just a matter of time until those drones come with a taser attached to them. So I don't know, it's disturbing to me to see this obvious and apparent move to totalitarianism while people just cheer. Because, like, yay, we want this vaccine, yay, we want these hospitals, which if they offered them and gave and said, hey, you can convert our hospital or our hotel into a hospital, it's a completely different story than a little mini dictator sitting in a governorship signing a bill that says your hotel is now mine, and then signing another one that says, okay, well, the police can just deploy drones to fight crime now. Because it's something that won't stop. Because we've sold military technologies to our police department for the last decade now, and it's something that program continues on to this day.
All right. Well, I had a little bit of wine, but you know, I almost feel like there's nothing to be done. It's almost like a Greek tragedy. It's almost like the chicken's coming home to roost. Because be quiet!
Great tragedy.
I mean, the way I look at it is they created our general strike for us. They picked us all out of our jobs, put us at home, which is something that organizers have been trying to do forever. And now it's our responsibility to reach people where they're at and say, don't go back until we've met these conditions as a society. Like, don't give them your labor, whether it's in a military factory making masks and ventilators or your local Kroger. Don't give them your labor to use, because at this point they're telling us to stay home, and we can withhold it. And we can say, for whatever reason, whatever cause you're fighting for, you can say, we're not going back until this condition is met. And if we can find ways to build local sustainability in this emergency with turning like soccer fields into farm fields, we can feed people and provide them with the things that make them want to stay home, which I think may be our strongest benefit at this point, is getting people not to want to go back to work until they have a basic level of health care that is distributed, in my opinion, through the National Nurses Union outside of our war criminal government, but still in some way that allows access for everybody. So that's the one thing I hope, is that people coming out of this realize centralized government is garbage, and we need to look out for each other because no one else will.
I hear you. And I just want to say you have a very soothing voice. You sound like Kermit the Frog. Are you from Minnesota?
No, I'm in Cleveland.
Oh. Doesn't he have like a Kermit the Frog accent? Anyway, I just wanted to point that out at you.
Thanks, I think.
Is it not easy being green, Andrew? Let us know.
It's terrible being green, let me tell you.
Oh, man.
But no, so we are going to actually get ready for our next guest here to hop in, and I think we want to cover a couple news segments before. Do you want to give Jared and Elizabeth a little outro, Taylor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first, Jared is not with us, and maybe he'll come back.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So I just want to thank you.
I apologize.
I want to thank you for coming on and for also having such an upbeat personality and being a lot of fun on this stream, because we're talking about some heavy stuff. Everybody could use a break. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Can you let us know just some final thoughts about your perspectives on this virus, maybe where we're headed, and a final message that you have for everybody that's watching?
Okay.
And you both can go.
Final message. Don't buy shit. Save money. Learn how to, you know what? I'm not even going to tell people not to stockpile toilet paper at this point, because you fucking stockpile what you need to stockpile to secure your family.
Sorry about that. I was trying to keep the kids quiet, but kind of unsuccessfully. But you know,
I know
Yeah,
the
no,
words
that's
to that song, and I sing it every week.
Oh, this is you.
I do.
So many books. Sorry. I think we moved on to their next guest.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Oh, well, we're getting ready to, yeah. Before you guys go though, before you wrap up and let people know what you have going on and where they can go if there are still copies of what happened to Bernie Sanders and stuff like that. If you're not doing anything this weekend, please come on my show again, because I would love to have an extended
Always
conversation
a
with you.
pleasure.
Yeah, no, I always like.
Oh, you know, we got so much going on here with the quarantine. You know?
No, but
Well, I mean, you know.
You know, we're it's interesting. I mean, the courts are in a state of flux.
They're closed. They're not in a state of
Well,
flux.
I mean, some are closed,
The
others.
Supreme Court is closed.
Right, but other.
We're not on, right? We're not on anymore.
You're on, yeah.
Oh,
We're live. Yeah.
You're
We're still going.
Yeah. So the courts are in a state of flux. Some are closed, some are not closed. Hearings are happening as there's continued economic uncertainty, and you know the shit continues to hit the fan with the coronavirus, and who knows what else they've got coming down the pike for us. You know, more and more people are going to be suing each other, and that's going to just create an absolute gridlock in the courts. So we have to stay open for our clients.
we open for business. 305-234-2060. If you have a legal problem, call me. Leave a message, ask for Elizabeth Beck.
Yeah.
If we can't help you, we will try to find somebody who can. 305-234-2060. Beck and Lee, civil litigation, licensed in Florida and California. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I mean, we're all working. Our firm's all working remotely. I mean, last words for people. I would just say this is going to be a long haul. I mean, we're at the very, very beginning of something that's going to be very painful, but may ultimately prove to be very, very transformative and take us in political and social directions we never envisioned. Just think of, 1929, the stock market crashed.
It sounds like he's talking about chemotherapy.
If you don't want to,
that you survived.
Listen, if you don't want me to, please, can you let me continue? So, basically, just think back to 1929 when the stock market crashed. It took us even a while before World War II started up, and then that went on for 5 years. Long period, but what we call the modern era of the 20th century emerged from that. So I think it's going to be a long haul, though. So people need to be mentally and physically strong. And that's all I have.
All right, Jared, Beck, thank you guys so much.
Okay, thanks so much.
Absolutely. I do want to introduce our second guest of the evening. Joe Kishore is also joining us. He is a returning guest on the Vigils. Joe is a presidential candidate of the Socialist Equality Party, and he's also a writer for the World Socialist website, an organization and publication that we frequently cite on the Vigils, and he's also the National Secretary for SEP US. So Joe, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you do actually have sort of a different perspective than what was presented in the first segment on this vigil. So I want you to have the opportunity to kind of speak about what your perspective is on the coronavirus and this crisis that we are experiencing. And thank you again for coming on.
Thank you. Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah, you're good.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Well, first of all, I think these are serious questions, and they require a serious response. Of course, the persecution of Julian Assange, first of all, which is the framework for the vigils that you are having. But of course, now this is intersecting with what is a massive global crisis. I think there cannot really be an underestimation of the significance of the both the coronavirus pandemic and the absolute disaster of the government's response in the United States and internationally. And I think it raises really serious political questions that require a serious response. I mean, I think that one thing that is clear from the crisis which is unfolding in the United States is the criminal level of indifference on the part of the Trump administration, but more broadly the American ruling class, as to the very lives of millions of people in this country. The absolute lack of preparation, the criminal response, the level of the response, everything has been dictated by the interests of the corporate and financial elite in this country. And as a consequence, I mean, we're talking about of course, first of all, a healthcare emergency, an economic crisis, which is going to affect tens of millions of people. And it's a product of the actions of the ruling class. I think, in that sense, I mean, aside from the what I take to be the level of unseriousness of your last guess, I think that one can't underestimate the significance of the coronavirus itself, in terms of its. Oh, yes, of course, it will be utilized by the state, no doubt. But I think first of all, there's an enormous level of opposition, which is developed. I mean, the response of workers to this is not, we should just continue life as normal. The response of the working class, more and more, and there's growing protests, auto workers, Amazon workers, other sections of the working class, who are outraged at the fact that they are being forced to continue to work, that they don't have sanitary equipment. There's been a whole series of wildcat strikes that have already erupted. I mean, it's just really the beginning. Starbucks workers, Amazon workers, the Instacart workers strikes. There's a growing mood of social anger in the working class over the response of the ruling class to this. And I think that really should be the focus, and really sort of addressing the criminal character of the response of the ruling class to this massive crisis.
I mean, I definitely agree, and I hope that the strikes are something that continue to trend through. And like, my biggest concern, while the virus is this terrible blight that's literally wrapping around the world at this point, is that people won't, at municipal levels, take it seriously enough to think about what they can do to make sure that their citizens can still access fresh water and can still access fresh food and can still have the basic necessities. Because a lot of times the cities right now are just worried about, okay, well, how are we going to even have a meeting? Because they're not allowed to meet face to face anymore. And most cities are so technologically inept that their city officials can't even figure out how to get together to have a meeting to talk about these problems that their communities are facing. So I think that it's just the level of incompetence expressed by the entire system that we have set in place right now are really glaring at the micro level and the macro level,
which is dictated by class interests. We use the term on the World Socialist website, malign neglect. That is to say, it's neglect which is motivated by definite interests. I mean, one point that was made earlier, which I think it was quite correct. I mean, they utilized this crisis. I mean, first of all, they treated it not as a healthcare crisis, but as a market problem. I mean, of course, the first response of the Trump administration was to say, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It's all going to go away. Don't worry about it." Then they treated it as an opportunity to hand themselves trillions of dollars. The the assets of the Federal Reserve increased just this past week by $1 trillion. They just turned over $1 trillion to Wall Street. And where is that going to come from? It's going to come from working class. It's going to come from the destruction of social programs. They treated it as an opportunity. And in fact, there are even those within the ruling class, and it's largely behind the scenes, although sometimes it comes out into the open, where they say, well, if there's a lot of old people who die as a result of this, there's a silver lining. It will cut healthcare costs. They've been talking about this. There was a Telegraph reporter who said, well, there's an economic upside to all of this. But the whole response has been dictated by class interests, by a corporate and financial oligarchy which runs this country. And it's really that, of course, which is behind the extreme danger to democratic rights. I mean, if you consider the fate of Julian Assange, who now his appeal for release on bail because of the coronavirus has been denied, and in a trial which has been a mockery of due process from beginning to end. The persecution of Assange is, of course, bound up with who Assange is. But more broadly, it's an expression of the drive by this ruling elite toward dictatorship. And on that, I very much agree. I mean, there is a real danger. The measures which are being taken, but these are measures which are dictated by class interests.
What do you think
Absolutely.
is the appropriate response, and what do you think the government should be doing right now, or perhaps should have done maybe many months ago? What do you think would be the best solution?
I would say many years ago. I've been reading some of the reports on warning of the danger of a pandemic. I mean, they go back to the early 2000s at the very least, to the Bush administration, certainly through the Obama administration's reports, which are talking about the fact that the United States has a dangerously low supply of ventilators, that hundreds of thousands of ventilators are required to stockpile in the case of a pandemic like this, and nothing was done. The cost to produce 1 million ventilators would have been on the order of $10-15 billion, a tiny fraction of what is spent on the military every year, not to mention what they turn over to the corporate and financial oligarchy. But nothing was done to prepare for this. Now the stockpiles are beginning to run out. You already have hospitals which are sharing ventilators because there's too many people who are dying, who require life-saving ventilators. They're already sharing them. You have a situation developing in the United States, which is like that, which is already developed in Italy, where doctors are going to be forced to decide who is going to live and who is going to die. They'll have to choose who gets a ventilator and who doesn't, because they're not stockpiled. You have the running out of face masks. I mean, it is extraordinary how unprepared, despite the fact that there were warnings. I mean, Trump always gets up these press conferences. Oh, no one ever heard of the coronavirus. No one could have known that such a thing could have happened. It's a complete lie. They knew such a thing could happen, and they did nothing. But it's not just Trump, because the Democrats are the same way. I mean, they've done nothing. What have the Democrats been talking about for the past 3 years? The greatest threat to the American people is Vladimir Putin, is Russia. And of course, that was utilized as part of their offensive against Assange and WikiLeaks and the whole anti-Russia campaign. But they're actually trying, believe it or not, to spin the coronavirus as part of their anti-Russia campaign. There's been some articles in the Washington Post recently on this theme. But they've done nothing, and now you have Biden. I mean, the Democratic Party, as much as the Republicans, is responsible for this. I mean, there should have been a massive investment in healthcare infrastructure, the development of stockpiles, the building up of hospitals. By the way, I would disagree. I think these luxury hotels should be seized. These luxury apartments should be seized, and they should be turned into facilities for healthcare. They're still building luxury apartments in New York City under conditions in which the city is engulfed in this pandemic. But there should have been a massive investment in healthcare infrastructure to prepare for this. Instead, you have hospitals shutting down. And why? It's because it's all based upon the principle of profit. I mean, that's what's guided everything that the ruling class in this country has done, and it's produced the conditions for this catastrophe.
And the biggest thing too right now also, and it relates back to Julian's campaign, is the threat to people in prisons. Because it's something that they literally create conditions for viruses and bacteria and illnesses to sweep over these places. They're highly unsanitary. The people get contact from the outside world through interacting with their lawyers and through the legal process, and then through visitors, but also through the guards themselves. And like in Belmarsh Prison, for example, they had 100 staff call off because they were self-isolating for the coronavirus. And there's been multiple reports and multiple deaths through the UK's prison system, and it's something that it's just a matter of time until it sweeps across the country here in the United States. And you have nations like Iran that are these brutal theocratic dictatorships that free 80,000 people at the drop of a hat because they understand that these people are at high risk, that these people are going to be killed if they are not released from jail. And at this point, we're not only creating a literal genocide of people inside of our prison systems once this sweeps through, but at the same time that we're losing our freedom of association. The greatest trial for free speech has literally unfolded for the first week. Julian was denied bail shortly thereafter last week, and then his evidentiary hearing isn't until May 18th. And the court systems may not even be open then to have this trial come out. So it's my hope that not only Julian gets freed because he is a very non-violent offender, like he literally released information to the public that a journalist would do, but that all the non-violent offenders would be released. Because at this point, those people are just waiting in there to die otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, it's the conditions in the prisons are disastrous. Of course, you also have now the conditions in refugee camps, which, I mean, if it starts to spread there, not to mention, I mean, it's only really beginning to spread in India, in Brazil, in Turkey. I think particularly in South Asia where this develops, I mean, you have, I think it's being massively underreported, and you have conditions of poverty, people living in cramped quarters. You're talking about a really massive catastrophe. I mean, here in Detroit, it's now emerging as an epicenter. It very much intersects with conditions of poverty, as with any crisis like this. You have a sort of, in some sense, a healthcare crisis. All right, there's a pandemic. There's this virus, which is particularly more lethal. It's particularly more can be spread more easily, and it's a healthcare crisis. But now it intersects with a social system, and everything in that society, really sort of creates the conditions for it to become, from a healthcare problem to a really massive social and economic disaster. I think just in response to the last question about what would one do, I mean, I think the basic point is that the resources exist to handle, to respond to this, to make sure that there is universal testing, to make sure that everyone has access to free and universal healthcare, the best healthcare available, that everyone who loses their job has a full income, that paid time off, that everything is done to make sure that those who are dislocated have a home. The basic social requirements. I mean, the resources exist to deal with this, to respond in a rational and scientific way, to make sure that all production which is non-essential is shut down, while all production that is essential is carried out in a safe and healthy manner. But the question is, how are those resources directed? Who controls the resources? Is it being allocated to the the 400 people who own more wealth than the bottom 67% of the population? Is it allocated to serving their interests? Is it allocated to the Jeff Bezoses of the world? Or is it allocated to meeting the needs of the vast majority of the population? I think that's the basic question.
Also, too, we've learned, just to kind of touch on some U.S. foreign policy, because, Joe, I do want to get your thoughts in on this. We know that the U.S. has continued sanctions on Venezuela and Iran. However, recently today, we're learning that there is some sort of bargaining taking place. But before we get into that specifically, we know that there's a specific report here, a report from the Center for Economic Policy and Research. Between a period of 2017 and 2018, there have been 40,000 civilian deaths in Venezuela due to U.S. sanctions. We could only imagine that that number is going to increase and probably already has during this corona crisis. What do you make of this? I think it's really important that we do talk about this, because this is really serious, and this is also happening in Iran. At the same time, countries that the U.S. has historically demonized, being China, Russia, and Cuba, have really stepped up to aid Italy, and Cuba has really stepped up to provide aid to England, I believe, as well. So what do you make of the U.S. foreign policy at this time?
Well, they're utilizing this. The ruling class bases itself on the principle of never let a good crisis go to waste. And they will utilize the crisis to advance their interests. I think in particular, and the operations of American imperialism are not going to go away. They are continuing. They will utilize this to press for their regime change operation in Iran, in Venezuela, absolutely. I think that's the basic question, and they'll use. I mean, the conditions in Iran, the fact that Iran doesn't have access to basic healthcare supplies as a result of the sanctions, is a crime. We are calling for an international coordinated response to this, and part of that has to be an end to all sanctions, an end to the sanctions against Iran, an end to the sanctions against Venezuela, and it requires an opposition to the imperialist policy of the United States. But they will utilize this against, and clearly the developments today make evident that they're going to try to use this to develop their offensive against Venezuela.
And then also to just for
so we found out a tweet from Code Pink here just before we went on that the Trump administration, in addition to putting a $15 million bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head last week, ordered naval vessels to go off the coast of Venezuela. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there's just no pause of going to other countries and destabilizing them and overthrowing their democratically elected leaders for the acquisition of natural resources and supremacy.
I'm seeing just some of those reports myself just now. I mean, the deployment of the Navy. The Venezuelan people continue to suffer tremendously due to Maduro and his criminal control over the country, and drug traffickers are seizing on this lawlessness. I mean, that was the whole theme of the press conference that Trump gave this afternoon. They're going to use this so-called war on drugs to justify, and you had Esper on, to justify their campaign against Venezuela now.
For a capitalist country, the United States sure doesn't like competition when it comes to being the major drug trafficker in the world.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get that in because it sounded really good in my head when I wrote it 8 seconds ago. It did. No, it's just, it's fascinating. I mean, we've got just a couple of weeks ago, Pompeo was running around saying we needed to bomb Iran. Now we're sending I don't know how many are in. I don't know how many ships have been sent, but more than 2 is a freaking fleet in terms of the firepower that they can carry. Definitely going to have to look into the specifics on that more. And if anyone in the chat knows, go ahead and post it, please. Let us know what the specifics on this are. How are you campaigning as a presidential candidate in the pandemic? How's that working? Like, or do you have? Because I want the people that are watching who may not be familiar with you to get to know you a little bit better. So how are you going about? How are you going about
altered the plans of everyone, and it certainly altered our plans. We were going to have a whole series of meetings throughout the country, which we of course had to cancel. But I think, our campaign is always, from the beginning, it's been oriented not so much in terms of sort of electoral politics, although, we will be campaigning to get votes. And I mean, it's not even clear, what's going to happen in this election. I think that the election is, it's very unclear what's going to happen this year in terms of American politics, who's going to be running, and, even if there's going to be an election, or the precise form that it will take. But our campaign has really never been oriented towards electoral politics in that sense. We are oriented towards the development of working class struggle. And we launched this campaign by insisting that this country was we're entering a period of mass social upheavals. I think one of the things I talked about the last time I was on your show was the insistence that the fight to free Assange had to be rooted in the development of the class struggle, not in the politics of the Democratic Party. And we had begun to see that. Now, I think with this pandemic, I think that this is producing an amount of social anger in this country, which is very difficult to overstate. People see the criminal indifference of the state, the fact that corporations are making workers work in unsafe conditions. You're going to have a situation where people are just unable to pay their bills. It's generating an immense amount of social anger. This is one of these events which is sort of transformative, and people go through an enormous change. Capitalism is becoming again a dirty word, and we're in a period now of real social explosions, I think, and it's just begun. I mean, I don't see, how this is going to continue for the next month, 2 months, without producing class conflict, and that's what our campaign is oriented towards. Trump is declaring that, or he was declaring, and now they've sort of extended it, but they wanted everyone to go back to work. They've handed out $1 trillion to Wall Street, and they want people now to go back to work in order to continue producing profit. But you can't do that without creating social upheavals and class struggle. It is to the working class that our party is oriented, to the development of class struggle. One thing I disagreed with in the earlier discussion was that, the idea that people, don't want to fight. I mean, I think that's just a big misreading of the state of American society. I think that there's there's enormous social anger. Our movement is directed towards the development within that of a conscious political leadership, one which understands that the problem is capitalism, and the solution to capitalism is the development of a movement in the working class in the United States and around the world to take political power and restructure the economy on the basis of social need and not private profit. And so that's what we're doing in the election campaign. Yes, the coronavirus pandemic has sort of changed the forms of the campaign as it's changed everything. But the content, actually, of the campaign, I think, has really been vindicated in these developments because, I think the case for socialism is made by what is happening. the case for the abolition of capitalism. There was already a movement for socialism developing. It found expression in support for Sanders. But one thing is clear. I mean, aside from the fact that Sanders is preparing to end his campaign, he's not even talking about capitalism anymore. He's not talking about socialism, of course. Anyway, the short answer is yes. It's of course enormously affected our campaign, but it's the form. The content, is confirmed, and I think we are fighting to give the social anger, the development of the class struggle in this country, a conscious political form and direction.
And let's be honest. I mean, Bernie Sanders. If you're running a campaign and the goal of the campaign is get elected to the thing I'm running for, Bernie Sanders has been doing just a shit job of it the entire time that he's been out here this past year, or really the last 4 years that he's just steadily been running for president. At what point do you think, Joe, it stops being a campaign and starts being another way to funnel money into the DNC?
Well, I would say it's the purpose of Sanders' campaign from the beginning was money, but to funnel support behind the Democratic Party, and to try to convince people that the Democratic Party is a political institution that is capable of realizing social reforms, that the interests of the working class can be expressed through this party. I mean, that's what he always has meant by his political revolution. And that goes the same with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, who, the Democratic Socialists of America, who claim that, somehow the Democratic Party is going to be reformed. Yeah, I think we talked the last time about the pseudo-left, the ISO, and these organizations around the Democratic Party who, cast shame upon themselves for their support for the persecution of Assange. But I think as part of a broader political function, they serve to try in some way to keep social anger within the confines of the Democratic Party, and therefore capitalism. I don't think in the long run or in the short run that's going to be possible. In fact, I think the whole institution, all the institutions of the state are breaking apart over this. I don't know what the Democratic Party is going to do in this election. I mean, Biden is going on about how this doesn't change anything about Medicare for all, his opposition to even mild social reforms. And Sanders is preparing to end his campaign. He voted for, by the way, this bill that passed unanimously in the Senate, the multi-trillion dollar bailout of Wall Street. He voted for it. It provides $454 billion, I think, to the Federal Reserve to buy unlimited sums of assets from the banks and corporations, including buying up corporate debt for the first time. Sanders voted for it. And I think that says a lot more about his politics than his, sort of left rhetoric. It's been about promoting the Democratic Party. But I don't think we're going to be able to contain this that much longer.
Not only did he vote for it, he spent an inordinate amount of time grandstanding on the Senate floor, ostensibly to get unemployment benefits for 3.8 million people when it was already written into the bill, when the bill was going to unanimously pass regardless, whether or not, Rand Paul had an objection to it. Turns out they're the one Congress critter out of all of them that took issue with it, Thomas Massie, has been castigated not just by people in his own party for his objections, but by the left and by the center along with it. How dare you want people to get paid? How dare you speak out against a $4.5 trillion handout to Wall Street? The thinking is just so backwards in all.
Massey's a right-wing Republican.
Yeah.
I mean, his objections, I think, were of a different character than, he was advocating for workers.
I'm not suggesting that he wasn't doing a little bit of grandstanding on his own, but he went.
He was in the libertarian fashion.
So he's right-wing.
His argument was essentially, he didn't even point out the $1,200 except to call it the thing that helped the medicine go down for the American people, more or less, where he called out specifically the fact that banks were getting so much money and that this $1,200 was literally a handout just to make people okay with it. So he doesn't take the same perspective on it, but nonetheless, I appreciate someone actually calling out the fact that this is a trillion upon $1 trillion handout to the literal most wealthy people that created the
Well, I
crisis
think one
we're
of the
in
things
the
that was
first
significant
place.
is, Ocasio-Cortez in that vote, she sort of grandstanded about, the bailouts to the corporations and everything else. And then she didn't, she made no effort to force a roll call vote on the bill, so they passed it by acclamation. But you have these figures within the Democratic Party, so-called left, who, I mean, their real class, the real class character of their politics, I think, comes through in events like this. And they talk, they make various mild criticisms of this or that, but when it comes down to it, they back policies which benefit the ruling class. And that includes the persecution of Assange. I mean, it's still the case that Sanders has not said a single word about the persecution of Julian Assange. And you had the one candidate who made the briefest reference to Assange in the Democratic Party, Tulsi Gabbard. She, as was I think entirely predictable, dropped out of the race and supported Biden. I mean, this.
Yeah.
The
I also want to make a
question,
comment on that because in the World Socialist website, it was reported that, and I can't remember who wrote this article, but it was quite fascinating. And it was about Tulsi Gabbard basically supporting Biden. And in this article, it was also revealed that a group of about 80-some former CIA veterans and former intelligence agents and spies and members of the national security state actually authored a statement and a letter in support of Joe Biden, saying that he was the president to restore U.S. respect throughout the world, and that the U.S. has lost its prestige throughout the world, that Joe Biden was the candidate to become president and the one that was going to help restore this loss of respect, which we know that means he's going to continue on with this American imperialism throughout the world and these regime change wars. And the fact here, and the significance of that, and this may be a little bit of a stretch, it was worded very well on the World Socialist website, is the fact that here's Tulsi Gabbard, who ran on this idea of a much different type of U.S. foreign policy that she wanted to see come to fruition, basically where the United States is no longer engaging in regime change wars. And here she is supporting this candidate who has been backed by the very people who created and advocated for the very wars that she has opposed. But again, I would say my colleagues, Andrew and Steve, were not surprised by her endorsement, and you guys did call it out and say she would eventually sell out. In fairness, she did say that she would support the Democratic nominee, but technically Joe Biden is not the nominee yet, and I don't think people would be upset with her if she did not hold on to that promise. I think she would have been been uplifted for her decision to not support Joe Biden.
Well, I think her endorsement of Biden came at a time when there was a real coordinated campaign within the Democratic Party to essentially undermine the Sanders campaign. Because she came out, I think it was right after, you had the big wave of dropouts from the other major Democratic Party candidates, and they all endorsed Biden, except for, of course, Elizabeth Warren, who dropped out without officially endorsing anyone, although that was, essentially an endorsement of Biden as well. But you had a whole campaign to undermine the Sanders campaign. I mean, I think the Democratic Party overall, that is the forces that control the Democratic Party, did not and does not want a Sanders campaign. And because not because I think of Sanders himself, but because they don't want to run a campaign based upon questions of social inequality and class issues, which Sanders has appealed to, and that's not what they want to run on. They don't want to encourage that. So Gabbard dropped out and endorsed. I think it was entirely predictable. I think her anti-war credentials were largely. She didn't really oppose war. She was critical of certain elements of American policy, but she wasn't opposed to American imperialism. Anyway,
I mean, she called herself a hawk on terror, and she provided cover for the drone program. Chomsky calls it the global assassination program, and I think that's one of the more descriptive way, or one of the more apt ways to describe it. The way that she said regime change wars was like so out of a think tank or a focus group that it was hard to take any of it seriously. Andrew and I have had a running joke for a long time about who's your second favorite Council on Foreign Relations member. And personally, for me, it's Dennis Kucinich.
Yeah, the man who single-handedly gave us the largest redistribution of wealth to insurance companies, where they're taking trillions of dollars off of our backs to bolster the profits of the for-profit insurance system. So, I mean, to all those who praise him as a hero, he's the man that also could have stopped wealth being given to the largest insurers and said, no, it's either the most minor change to the for-profit system that would allow everyone to be covered, or I'm not doing this at all. Because he was the final vote, the final decision to pass the Affordable Care Act and give us what has turned into another form of looting of the American working class, which is literally taking their wealth and just throwing it into the pockets of the wealthiest insurance owners across the country, while at the same time providing I don't want to call it competition, but providing people with the most limited access to care, even if they qualify for these programs. And a lot of times it turns into employers using the bullshit tricks so that way they have to do less of a burden to actually make sure under this current system that their employees even have health care to begin with.
There's a lot which is sort of really outrageous about what is happening. And everything the ruling class is doing, the Democratic Party, and all of its rottenness. I think one shouldn't be surprised by it. It's what the Democratic Party is, and of course, the Trump administration. I think, though, that what we're really actually beginning to see, and actually have begun to see ever more directly over the past 2 years, but now I think is emerging ever more concretely and in a sort of an immediate way, is the counter or the antipode to that, the response of masses of people. And that, I think, provides the basis for resolving all the great problems that we confront. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic itself, but the fight against American imperialism, the fight to free Julian Assange. What we're beginning to see is the growth of mass social struggle and the intervention of the masses into historical events. That's what sort of is we're in the early stages of. You're getting to see wildcat strikes, where you're going to see the breaking free of the control of the trade unions. Masses of people beginning to fight and sort of realize their own social power. That is one thing that I think people sort of comes out of this present situation. I think one of the points that was made earlier was that the question of a general strike. I mean, the working class is the most powerful social force in the world. It produces everything. It is the source of all wealth. And it's beginning to fight and beginning to become conscious of what it is fighting for. And I think that is, the period that we're in, and it really actually provides us with a great deal of hope about the future amidst all the horrors, amidst the coronavirus pandemic, amidst the persecutions and the efforts to implement authoritarian forms of rule. Amidst all of that, there is a different social force that's emerging.
Absolutely. So, I'd like to thank you for coming on with us, Joe. Is there any like final thoughts for the evening that you have, or anything that you'd like to leave our audience with? And where do you think they could find you?
Yeah, well, I guess the final thought is that I think that our camp. I mean, actually, just to go back to your initial question about what we're doing. Our campaign is fighting to build a socialist leadership in the working class in the United States and all over the world. That's what our party is doing. That's what the World Socialist website is doing. We're fighting to build a socialist leadership in the working class, to make conscious the unconscious struggles that have already begun to erupt, to build a leadership. And that's what we're doing. We're holding online meetings. We're holding, of course, we're writing every day. We're very active on social media, both myself and my running mate, Narissa Santa Cruz. You can find me on Twitter at J Kishore, Jkishore. That's my handle, and we're fighting very actively in this to build a political leadership, and we encourage anyone here listening here who agrees with that to come to our website, to go to the World Socialist website. Socialism2020.org is our campaign site, and to sign up to become involved in the campaign and join our party, the Socialist Equality Party.
All right, Joe, always great to have you with us.
One of the biggest interesting things, real quick, because one of the big interesting things, just before we let Joe go, because this just kind of came to my head here as we were talking, the Espionage Act that Julian is being persecuted under, I think it's 17 of his charges are filed underneath that. One of the first times that it was used to actually amend the United States Constitution and our First Amendment rights was against a socialist organizer called Eugene Debs, who had spoken out against World War I and had encouraged people not to join the military because it was a bankers' war. So I think as you've pointed out throughout all this, and I just want to reiterate this again with you and see kind of if you could draw some parallels between these two too. But the things that are produced by people and by organized labor have largely gone outside of the control of what any of them have the ability to say yes or no to. And I guess it really relates back to how organizers were originally targeted for using that social power that they had to try to stop the war machine. And then it transitions now into 2020, where we see these same laws that had been used to stop great organizers of the past stop people that are also organizing against the war machine in and of itself. So I think it's really important to highlight the struggle between the workers' right to actually choose what they're producing and their ability to distribute accurate information, because it's ultimately one and the same. Because if you don't have the right to know what the products you're making are being used for, at that point you can't make informed decisions about what you produce as a worker. So I think that that's something that's really important too. And I was just wondering if you had any ways to reiterate that a little bit wiser.
Well, no, I think that, what's the campaign against Julian Assange been all about? It's of course targeted at him and for his exposures of American imperialism and the crimes of the American state and corruption, and including of the Democratic Party. So it's targeted him, it's targeted WikiLeaks, and of course Chelsea Manning as well, whose treatment has been horrific. But I think it's also been about the criminalization of dissent, the criminalization of opposition to the policies of the American ruling oligarchy. and they are, that, and of course the whole campaign on fake news. The anti-Russia campaign of the Democratic Party has been utilized as the framework for criminalizing dissent, implementing censorship, including against the World Socialist website. They are trying to crack down on opposition, and they will. The threats to democratic rights are very real. The natural political form for the levels of social inequality that exist in the United States is not democracy. But they have the working class to contend with. And, they may think that they can just implement that they can just implement their demands, but they have the working class. They have the international working class, the most powerful social force on the planet. And that social force, unified and based upon a clear political and revolutionary perspective, that's the social force that provides the hope for the future. So the ruling class can have its plans, but the working class also has its say. All right. Well, it was nice speaking to you guys again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Joe, thank you so much for joining us again. That was Joe Kishore. He is a presidential candidate of the Socialist Equality Party. Do make sure you check out his website if you're interested in seeing more about his campaign. So Joe Kishore of the World Socialist website, also a frequented publication that we cite on this vigil. But now it's time to transition into our news section of the evening. I know earlier that we did want to get into this news about the destruction of the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 in New York City. There was a 4-year study that was conducted. We are now learning that once it was thought that this building was burned down, and this was from a result of fires. However, we're learning otherwise, and Andrew was really excited to get into this article earlier. So Andrew, I'm going to hand it off to you to provide the viewers with some backstory of exactly what was found here and who conducted this investigation and what this all means.
Yeah, so it was actually the University of Alaska. I don't think it's.
Yeah, I don't know.
If you're watching us right now, quit eating. No, so it's the AE911truth.org article. But essentially, I just want to touch on this because it's something that I think is still really important to cover because it's not a dead story. The public is still not fully aware of it, and it has to do with the Patriot Act and a bunch of other things that have allowed the intelligence state to grow as rapidly as it has within the last 2 decades. But basically, long story short of this is that after a 4-year study, they determined that Tower 7, the third tower in the World Trade Center complex that fell, was actually not caused by fires. And we covered it back on our 9/11 episode, where the whistleblowers from NIST came out and had actually said this, that their reports show that it could only have been caused by a controlled demolition. And I just think it's important to direct people back to this every once in a while because this is a brand new study that finished up that says the exact same thing, that the Tower 7 could not have just burned down, that there had to be some kind of controlled system that all structural integrity failed at the same time to allow it to collapse in the way that it did. So I just wanted to put that out there for people because I do think, again, it's just part of that national security war drum that gets beaten every time we historically before this have tried to invade a country. But we do have a lot of news about Julian to go through as well, too, including a recent tweet that had come out with a video in it, if we could get that one pulled up from the DEA campaign. the Don't Extradite Assange campaign. And if you guys haven't checked out their website, go to don'textraditeassange.com because they have a lot of great resources. They have a playlist that's up there right now. So as we get that pulled up, I will. Cool.
A macabre game of
Do you want to
Russian
roll
roulette
that video for
is
us?
now being played with A macabre game of Russian roulette is now being played with Julian Assange's life. A judge turned down his bail application this week, keeping him in Belmarsh prison where 100 staff are already off sick with coronavirus. It's only a matter of time before the virus spreads from the 14 prisons and 27 prisoners that already have reported it through the entire prison system. Some 3,500 prison staff, that's 10% of the workforce, are already self-isolating. The head of the Prison Governors Association has previously warned that there will be deaths. Her prediction began to come true as the first prisoner died of COVID-19 last week. From the Prison Officers Association to the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, calls have been issued to release vulnerable prisoners so that they do not face illness or a possible death sentence. Julian Assange is imprisoned for no crime. He's no danger to the public. He suffers from a lung condition and he cannot be allowed to wait in his cell until he is infected with a killer virus. This is an emergency. Follow the links to write to your MP, sign our petition, repost this video. Julian Assange must be released, and released now.
So he lays out the basics there for what's going on, and it's something that a lot of us know, but it's really something that I feel like needs to be amplified more so than it is. So there's actually been a campaign that has started. There's 4 different hashtags, and it's based on country. There is Save Assange COVID-19, which is hashtag Save Assange COVID-19, which is the overall one that Miss Assange has been using in a lot of the other Free Assange groups. But then there's the 3 country-specific ones. There's Don't Kill Assange USA, Bail Assange UK, and Evacuate Assange OZ, which is Australia. And I just think it's really important for people individually and personally to start tweeting this out using these hashtags, and I'll put them up in the chat for everybody. But making sure that we build pressure and raise awareness. And one really great way is to post unpromoted tweets that you get. So as you're scrolling through your feed, as you're looking at Facebook posts, whenever they drop an ad, post something relevant about it, about Julian Assange, and put whatever link or whatever hashtag is for your country, whether it's Don't Kill Assange US, Bail Assange UK, or Evacuate Assange OZ. And then put all of the Save Assange COVID-19, because his news was already being so heavily censored across the internet that now with everything about the coronavirus going around, it's even more so being repressed. So I really hope that people can just personally start using this hashtag, start sharing the Doctors for Assange information out. But that kind of leads us into our next one here, which is there's actually been quite a bit of death within the UK prison system already due to COVID-19.
Yeah, actually there are 14 different prisons, including Wandsworth, which has at least 7 cases, Manchester, Cookham, Wood, Leeds, Birmingham, Oakwood, Wymont, Leyhill, Pentonville, Huntercombe, Barton Moss, which is a secure children's home. But as far as Belmarsh, I don't know if we have any stats on that prison specifically, but those prisons that I had just mentioned, there are confirmed cases there. And of course, we know that in prisons, because they're in close quarters, and especially in Belmarsh, where they're not receiving great health care, of course, or if any health care, because they're so close to one another, the chances of contracting this virus is extremely high. And of course, we know that the priority is probably not going to be to test prisoners. And I believe 100 staff members in Belmarsh, we've known for some time that 100 staff members did test positive for the virus.
If you could pop that article back up, Josh, because this is from March 25th, so about 6 days ago. There was actually some 3,000 prison staff, about 10% of the workforce, that were off on Tuesday that were either ill or self-isolating. A committee of MPs were told. The Justice Secretary told Commons Justice Committee that he was keen to make sure the release on temporary license where prisoners are let out for a short period of time after a risk assessment. My hope is that we can start tweeting at these different institutions, that we can start tweeting at these MPs, and we can say Julian Assange needs to be set free, because at this point, he's only held there on purely political charges. He's held there at the behest of the United States. They're not granting him bail at this time. And in his court trial, literally cited that the pandemic isn't basically bad enough for him to be able to be released, and that it would be up to the National Health Service of the UK. So if you have the ability to, email him, call him, send him messages on social media and demand Julian's freedom. Because right now is a moment in history that can't be lost underneath this virus, and that's the fact that free speech is being literally ripped away from us, and this man's very life is going to be taken simply for the fact that they don't want to let him go.
Real quick, well, we should have done this way earlier in the show, but friend of the show and just brilliant researcher and all-around wonderful human being, Elizabeth Mueller, is a targeted activist who has been really getting hammered by the intel community, and they're going at her through her job. So she has a GoFundMe up. We have supported it, and we are going to ask you right now that if you can, please contribute a little bit to this GoFundMe. If you can't, please share the link. We found out firsthand when we were crowdsourcing to go to London and DC just how important it is for you guys to share the links. And man, did you guys step up and you came through, and it was brilliant and beautiful. And thank you so much for that again, because we never could have done that without you. So now up on the screen is that GoFundMe link. Yeah, if it's at all possible to donate, and I know that shit is just crazy right now, and people are wondering, a bunch of people have lost their jobs. I'm about to no longer be able to go to work because they reclassified what most of what I do is a non-essential business. Residences don't need to be safe anymore during this pandemic, according to Santa Cruz County. So it is it's super weird. I see Rob Juno in the chat. By the way, Rob, thank you for the super chat earlier, and Ed Costello, I gotta thank you as well for the super chats. Rob, you did donate to that, and you're a wonderful human being, and thank you. I know that we're in uncertain times, and I know that yeah, shit is just crazy. Having said that, you know, if you would help out a family member with $5 or $10 so they could go grab some food, consider Liz our family member.
Absolutely.
Great initiative to take on. Remember, Liz was one of the researchers that worked alongside Susie Dawson on the live stream teach-ins for the 1 versus 5i campaign. We will be circulating this link on Action for Assange Twitter. I'll be sharing it, Andrew and Steve, on social media. So again, not everybody has the ability to donate, but circulating that link is so important. And any amount of donations, no matter how small, is greatly appreciated and really, really helpful for our friend and a really a good person, Elizabeth Mueller. So, and she's a friend of our vigils, and hopefully one day she'll be joining us as a guest. We look forward to that if she's open to doing so. But we do have some more news items we want to touch on. I'll hand it over to you, guys, and then we could pull up an article or two, and then we'll get into that some more.
Yeah, if we want to hop into number 6 here, the doctors for Assange. And if we could, I want to read through part of this statement because it came out on March 27th. Doctors for Assange strongly condemns Wednesday's decision by the UK District Judge Vanessa Barrister to deny bail to Julian Assange. Despite our prior unequivocal statements that Mr. Assange is at increased risk of severe illness and death were he to contract the coronavirus, and the evidence of medical experts, Barrister dismissed the risk, citing the UK's guidelines for prisons in responding to the global pandemic. I have no reason not to trust this advice as both evidence-based and reliable and appropriate. Notable, however, Barrister did not address that the increased risk to Mr. Assange relative to the UK general prison population, let alone the prisoners at Her Majesty's Prison Belmarsh, where Assange is incarcerated. Nor did she address the rapidly emerging medical and legal consequence that vulnerable and low-risk prisoners should be released immediately. And I'll drop this link into chat for everybody because I would encourage you to continue to read through it. On the idea of sending out the hashtags, link these as well, or link this. Go in, take a paragraph or a couple sentences out of it because none of it is wasted space, and put it into your tweets. And go through and over the course of this next week, try to put out tweets with all of these in them, with every line if you can, or the ones that you find the most powerful, and use those hashtags for the corresponding countries with Save Assange COVID-19. Because at this point, it's just additional torture. The fact that he can't even meet with his attorneys except over a non-secure video link, where there is no human interaction at this point. Even, I'm assuming, with the guards that would be bringing him food because of risk of contamination. So I just wanna make sure that this stays on the top of everybody's radar because there's people around the world that are working to get this man free, and I just hope that everyone in our audience will take the initiative to at the very least, put out some tweets about this, and at the very best, use whatever time you're allowed outside of the house to go put up signs, to pass out flyers to people if you're standing in a crowded parking or a crowded shopping area, and just be the person that makes this conversation happen around you, because without that, the message isn't going to get spread. But we do here, I want to skip number 7 if we could, and for 8 and 9, because there's been 2 prison governors that have put out a call for Julian's freedom. But before we get to, or not for Julian's freedom, but for early release for nonviolent offenders. But before we get to that, there's actually an article that Mrs. Assange tweeted out earlier today about just the conditions that are in Belmarsh right now, and reminding people that Julian Assange is held number 8. Oh, okay, that's fine. dailymaverick.co.za. But basically, the whole point of this article is to point out the fact that Julian Assange is an outlier in this prison, that it houses murderers, rapists, and terrorists, and that, again, for someone like him to be locked up in here is purely psychological torture. Yeah, at risk from coronavirus, Julian Assange is one of just 2 inmates in Belmarsh Maximum Security Prison held for skipping bail. And these are nonviolent offenders. These are people that literally, in Julian's case, had political asylum, had citizenship in the nation of Ecuador, and that got taken away for a $4 billion loan. If we can go down here to the second part, District Judge Barrister is overseen by Lady Emma Abernoth, the Westminster Chief Magistrate, who formally stepped aside on Assange's case after admitting a perception of bias. It is presumed that this relates to her husband's and son's link to military and intelligence establishments exposed by Assange and WikiLeaks. However, Judge Abernoth has refused to formally recuse herself from the case, meaning the defense cannot revisit her previous rulings in Assange's case. It is also likely that Abernoth was involved in appointing Barrister to oversee the case and is still responsible for supporting and guiding and liaisoning with her junior judge. Assange has always said he sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in June 2012 to avoid extradition to the United States for his publishing activities. He was grabbed from the Ecuadorian asylum by British police in April 2019 and initially imprisoned for 50 weeks for violating the bail conditions. That ruling, which was close to the maximum sentence for the offense for 12 months, appeared to be irregular. By contrast, British man Jack Shepherd, who in 2015 killed a woman on a speedboat crash on River Thames and was charged with manslaughter, was given a 6-month sentence for skipping bail, half that awarded to Julian Assange. Shepherd fled the country to a former Soviet Republic of Georgia for 10 months before he turned himself in and returned to the UK. So even a man that commits manslaughter gets treated better than a man that exposed the history of war crimes against Iraq and Afghanistan, against the man that exposed the torture programs of our government that are still ongoing to this day in Guantanamo Bay. And there's just so much wrong with the fact that even the judge overseeing this case is reading prepared statements in the bail hearing that basically said, like, no, we pretty much knew what you were going to say, and the decision's already been made. So there's not much in the UK that you're allowed to do right now. You can get out 1 time a day. That's what they're permitting the public. And it really just harkens back to the fact that Julian Assange was one of the people trying to stop this from happening to the world. That the atrocities that they committed against him, keeping him isolated, keeping him in solitary confinement for, at this point, almost a decade, is now literally being brought down upon the rest of the United Kingdom and the rest of the world at this point.
Yeah, it's Beth B in the chat. Beth was one of our crew in DC. Noted that here, let me go ahead and just read it. It's not even skipping bail at this point. The sentence was served and he should have been free at that time. He's only still there because the U.S. wants him held there. Yeah, he's a remand prisoner. He's just waiting to go to court and potentially be extradited to the U.S., which is a death sentence, no matter how you look at it. Not only was his time served, the warrant that they issued him, they issued it a week or 10 days after he had already sought and been granted asylum. Like it was the whole process, start to finish, just highlights the complete erosion of the rule of law and how rule of law only applies to people when a state entity wants to leverage it against them.
Yes, that's exactly right. And of course, we know that there will most likely be some serious repercussions that the UK knows it may face if it does not comply with the United States wishes, which is really unfortunate, but that is a fact and something that is cited often when we have these discussions. I spoke with a former attorney, Alexander Mercouris, about this, and he said, there's a trade deal that the UK definitely does not want to miss out on, which is really horrific when you think about it. This is someone's life here, We do have another article here. This was in the Interregnum, the interregnum.net, which is the publication of our friend Mohammed El-Mazi. He is a journalist in the UK and also writes for Sputnik. He wrote an article about how the prison governors are calling upon England and Wales to call for the early release of prisoners because of the COVID-19 threat. And once again, it's something we've been touching on all evening. This is really serious because this can be spread in prisons. And again, Assange's health, just to give you guys some info on that, he has had 4 respiratory tract infections, does have a chronic lung condition, does have premature osteoporosis. He's been in isolation for about 8 years now, and has depression, which can weaken one's immune system. So all of these factors put together put him at an increased risk of contracting the virus and having some really, really devastating consequences as a result of contracting that virus. So even the Prisoner Governors Association believes that these low-risk prisoners need to be released. Other advocacy groups have also called upon low-level prisoners to be released. And again, the judge in this situation still succumbed to, I guess you would call it, U.S. pressure, and still sided with the U.S. here. And hopefully it does go to an appeal. Edward Fitzgerald, Assange's attorney, said that he is likely to appeal this decision. So hopefully the advocacy that we're seeing from these groups will maybe be weighed a little bit more heavily in court, and that the judge will maybe think about that and how it looks for her that she's denying this person bail when they're at a great, great risk of contracting this deadly virus.
Oh, I'm not muted. I thought I was there for a minute. No, I can't stress how significant it is that we're watching a fully illegal proceeding roll out right in front of our eyes. And not only that, but one that as Julian Assange just said, utilizes punishment as process. If you ever wondered what psychological torture looks like, read up on Julian Assange's case. If you've ever wondered what an authoritarian, anti-free speech state looks like, and you don't live in the United States, look directly at the United Kingdom, because they're basically acting as a puppet government or a client state of the U.S., not necessarily the United States of America, but our intelligence agencies and our State Department. Recall that in one of the case management hearings, there were 5 officials from the U.S. State Department in the back of the courtroom who were huddling with the Crown prosecutor, who would then walk back up to Judge Baraister, Magistrate Baraister, and relay a message that she was completely responsive to hearing, and nice and cordial and friendly with them, and then snappish at Julian Assange's legal team. This is for a man who published documents. That's it. Like the idea that you can hold a nonviolent remand prisoner in custody during a pandemic or a viral outbreak, it sickens me. It does. It's why I'm here. It's why we're doing this. It's so vital that we throw everything we have at stopping these proceedings, or at least stopping the extradition. I think that's going to do it for the vigil tonight too. You guys want to go ahead and take it and close out?
Yeah, so I just want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you guys. I hope everybody that's watching is okay. I know this is a tough time. We're all struggling. So best of luck to everybody, sincerely, that's watching right now. And hopefully this will not last too much longer. Again, like we mentioned earlier in the vigil, if you can help out our friend Elizabeth Mueller with her GoFundMe, please do donate or circulate that link. Again, thank you guys for watching. And then also, too, I did take on a journalism and editor role, my first one officially, which is super exciting, with Activism Munich. It's an organization out of Germany that really supports many of the things that I support so much. And they were there during the extradition hearing and used my coverage. And it seemed to work out really well, to the point where I was taken on as a journalist and an editor. And I'm really excited and really grateful to be a part of that and work alongside Zen Raza. The organization has interviewed people such as Edward Snowden, Abby Martin, Noam Chomsky, Sreko Horvat, and many others. So it's really an honor to be joining their team. It's a great group of people, and I look forward to meeting more of them. So do check out their channel. Again, that's Activism Munich. Follow them on Twitter. And they've also been very supportive of Action for Assange, and that's also something we greatly appreciate. So again, a big thank you to everybody working behind the scenes on this vigil as well, Kimber Maddox and Josh Benton. Again, guys, I can't stress enough, there's so much work that goes into putting these vigils together. There are so many people that are working behind the scenes that you don't see on the screen that are really key in making sure that this runs smoothly. So my greatest appreciation and gratitude towards them. And you could follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak.
You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund. That's Andrew Zigmund. And I just want to give a couple court dates here, because there is a hearing coming up on April 7th for Julian Assange. It's a case management hearing with two anonymity issues with two of the witnesses. And then on May 18th through June 5th, his trial is still scheduled to start as it stands right now. If any of that changes in the craziness that's going on around the world, we will bring that up to you. And I would just like to thank everybody for joining us. I would like to thank Jared and Elizabeth Beck for the great work that they've done with the DNC fraud lawsuit. And I'd like to thank Joe Kishore for the amazing work that he does in elevating the consciousness of the working class.
Right on.
And happy birthday to Steve, by the way. Happy birthday, Steve.
Thank you. My name is Steve Boykin, and I host a show called Slow News Day, which you can find here on the YouTubes if you type in Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I have been putting out a ridiculous amount of content during this lockdown, so there's pretty much something for everyone as long as you don't like horse race politics. Yeah, let me echo what Andrew just said. Thanks to the Becks very much. I am going to email them pretty much directly and get them booked on my show for Sunday, so look for that. And Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos. And that will do it for us tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of this with us, guys. We really appreciate the live chats, both in Action for Assange and on my channel. You guys are always on point and entertaining as fuck. And if you see us like break out into a grin, half the time it's because we're reading something that you wrote in the chat. So we do appreciate you. And yeah, till next time, folks. Good luck to us all.